You are the master of your fate. Let's begin.
Disrespect doesn't hurt you, your reaction does. Let me say that again, not to repeat myself, but because it cuts so deep into the core of how most people live their lives unaware. The sting you feel when someone speaks down to you, ignores your presence, dismisses your idea, or treats you as if you don't matter. That pain isn't caused by their words or actions alone, but by the internal reflex you've trained yourself to obey without question. You flinch not because they've wounded you, but because somewhere inside, you've already accepted the possibility that you could be wounded in that way, that your worth is something fragile, something conditional, something that needs defending. And that belief, more than any insult ever spoken, is what truly disempowers you. I've watched men rise from nothing, not because they were never disrespected, but because they refused to let those moments define them. And I've seen others crumble beneath far less, not because the attack was stronger, but because the foundation beneath them was already cracked. This isn't about teaching you how to respond to others with clever comebacks or cold detachment. It's about rewiring the very center of your self-concept so that disrespect no longer registers as a threat, but as a signal, a test, perhaps even an invitation to demonstrate the quiet, unshakable certainty of who you are. By the end of this, you won't need to prove your value to anyone because you will have stopped seeking permission to embody it. You'll carry a single sentence, not as a mantra, but as a declaration, one you repeat in the silence between breaths when the world tries to rattle you, and it will steady your spine, clarify your mind, and return you to your center before you utter a single word in return. This is not about suppression or pride, it's about sovereignty, the kind that doesn't announce itself, but simply is like a mountain standing firm while the wind howls around it. So listen closely, because what you're about to learn isn't just a tactic for handling difficult people, it's the beginning of a new relationship with yourself, one where your value is not negotiated, not debated, not earned in the eyes of others, but known, deeply and without hesitation, as an unshakable truth. Every time you react to disrespect, you surrender your authority, because in that moment you place the power to define your worth in the hands of someone who may not even understand their own motives, let alone yours. Think of it this way. When someone speaks to you with condescension, indifference, or outright contempt, they are not delivering an objective verdict on your character or capability. They are revealing the state of their own inner world, their insecurities, their fears, their need to feel superior in a moment when they likely feel small. And yet, without even realizing it, you answer that noise with a performance. You defend, you explain, you justify, you retaliate. Or worse, you shrink, withdraw, and carry the weight of their words like a sentence. You give them a vote in the court of your self-esteem, and over time, that vote becomes a veto. I once knew a man bright, driven, full of vision, who spent years trying to convince his family that his dreams were valid, that his path was worthy, that he wasn't foolish for wanting more. He showed them plans, projections, testimonials, even early results. But because one older brother smirked and said, "Let's see if it lasts," he kept coming back, again and again, with more proof, more effort, more energy spent on validation. And in that endless cycle of seeking approval, he drained himself so much so that when real opportunity finally arrived, he didn't have the strength to seize it. His reaction to disrespect didn't just wound his confidence, it consumed his momentum. That is the hidden cost. Not the momentary sting, but the slow erosion of your power, your time, your focus, your fire. Reaction is instinctive, yes, but it is also primitive, a survival mechanism that served us when physical threats loomed, but now misfires in the face of emotional slights. The modern battlefield is not one of spears and shields, but of words, glances, tones of voice, and yet most people still fight like they're defending their life, when in truth they're only defending a story they've been telling themselves about who they believe they are. But here's the truth I learned from men like Carnegie and Edison. Strength does not announce itself in response to provocation. It reveals itself in the space between stimulus and response. The pause where you choose not to flinch, not to strike back, not to collapse, but to remain centered, grounded, certain. That pause is where power lives. And every time you skip it, every time you react, you train your mind to be a slave to circumstance rather than a master of self. You reinforce the idea that your peace depends on how others treat you, which is the most dangerous illusion of all. Because if your dignity requires their respect to survive, then you have already lost it. True authority is not something you demand from others, it is something you assume within yourself, quietly, consistently, regardless of the noise around you. And when you stop reacting, something remarkable happens. The people who once tried to diminish you begin to sense something different, a stillness, a confidence, a presence that cannot be rattled, and without you saying a word, they start adjusting their behavior, not because you've confronted them, but because you've outgrown the need to. That is the real victory, not winning an argument, but rendering it irrelevant. So ask yourself, not in anger, but in honesty, how much of your energy, your time, your mental clarity has been spent reacting to those who don't matter, defending against slights that only hurt because you believe them possible? How many dreams have been delayed? How many conversations avoided? How many risks left unmade because you were too busy protecting a version of yourself that should have been beyond attack? Because if your value requires defense, it is not value, it is vulnerability disguised as pride. And I'm here to tell you that you are not meant to live that way. You were meant to stand so firmly in the truth of who you are that disrespect doesn't knock you off balance. It merely confirms that you are moving forward, because those who rise always create friction for those who resist change. So let this be the day you stop giving away your authority. Let this be the moment you realize that every reaction is a withdrawal from your own account of power, and that the richest men I've ever known weren't rich in money alone, but in self-possession, in the quiet certainty that no opinion, no insult, no dismissal could alter the course they had set. That is the standard. That is the path. And it begins not with a grand gesture, but with a single shift in how you respond, no, how you choose not to respond when someone forgets who you are. The 3 seconds after disrespect are the most important of your life. Not because of what the other person has said or done, but because of what rises within you in that instant like a ghost from the past, whispering the oldest doubts you've ever known. You hear the tone, see the smirk, feel the dismissal in their posture, and before your mind can even form a thought, your body responds. Your chest tightens, your breath shortens, your jaw clenches, your pulse quickens. Not because the threat is real in any physical sense, but because your nervous system doesn't distinguish between emotional danger and actual survival risk. It reacts as if you're being cast out of the tribe, left without protection, stripped of belonging, and in that primal reflex, you lose access to your higher mind, your clarity, your strategy. You are no longer acting from principle or purpose. You are reacting from fear, from the buried memory of every time you felt unseen, unheard, or unworthy. And in that moment, you don't see the full truth, that the person in front of you may be acting from their own insecurity, their own need to feel control, their own unresolved struggle with self-doubt. You don't see that their behavior is not about you at all. It's about the void they're trying to fill. But you don't pause to consider that, because the old script is already running. Am I not enough? Did I do something wrong? Do they see me as weak? What will others think? These questions flood in not because they're logical, but because they've been rehearsed, perhaps since childhood, every time someone failed to honor you. And so you prepare your defense, your counterattack, your justification, or you retreat inward, folding yourself smaller to avoid further conflict. But here's what you must understand. That reaction is not protection, it's participation. You are not defending your value, you are confirming your belief that it's up for debate. If a king were spat upon, would he stop to argue with the beggar? Would he demand proof of his crown? No, he would simply continue walking, not because he didn't feel the insult, but because his identity was never tied to the opinions of those beneath him. And that is the level of self-possession I'm calling you to. Because the moment you flinch, whether through anger, sadness, or silence born of shame, you signal to yourself and to the world that you are vulnerable to their judgment. But what if you weren't? What if, instead of reacting, you recognize the moment for what it truly is? Not an attack, but a test. A test of whether you still believe the old story about your worth, or whether you finally claim the new one. The truth is, disrespect doesn't reveal your weakness, it reveals your beliefs. It acts like a mirror, showing you exactly where you still doubt yourself, where you still need approval, where you still tie your dignity to external validation. And that is why the real work doesn't happen in the conversation with them, it happens in the conversation with yourself. In that silent space between the insult and your response. That is where the battle is won or lost. Not with words, not with actions, but with the single thought you choose to believe in that instant. Do you believe you must defend your place in the world? Or do you know without question that you already occupy it? Because if you know, if you truly know, then no slight can unsettle you. You may feel the sting, yes, but you will not be ruled by it. You will not give it power. You will simply observe it, acknowledge the trigger, and return to your center, not with effort, but with the ease of someone who has stopped fighting for recognition and started living from realization. This is not suppression. It is not coldness. It is mastery. And it is available to you, not someday, not when you've achieved more, not when others finally see you, but right now, in this very moment, the next time someone forgets who you are. You don't have to change them. You don't have to prove anything. You only have to remember before you speak, before you act, before you react, that your value was never theirs to give or take away. It was decided long before this moment, and nothing that happens now can alter that. That is the truth. That is the anchor. And if you hold it, nothing can shake you. Say this before you say anything else, not as a chant, not as a trick of the mind, but as a declaration of the deepest truth you are capable of claiming. My value was decided long before this moment. I do not defend it. I express it. Let those words settle into your bones, not as a slogan, but as a new foundation beneath your feet, one that does not waver when the ground around you shakes. This is not positive thinking. It is correct thinking. It aligns you with the reality that your worth is not a variable subject to the opinions of others, nor is it something you earn in increments through approval, promotion, or praise. It is fixed. It is inherent. It is yours by virtue of existence, by the simple fact that you are here, with a mind, a will, a capacity to choose, to build, to endure, to rise. And no moment of dismissal, no careless word, no condescending glance can erase that. When you say this sentence, not quickly, not mechanically, but slowly, deliberately, with full awareness of its weight, you are not trying to talk yourself into confidence. You are returning yourself to a state of alignment, like a compass needle swinging back to true north after being jostled. Break it down, feel each part. My value was decided long before this moment. Decided by what? By your very nature, by the fire of ambition in your chest, by the dreams that visit you even when you're exhausted, by the resilience you've shown in silence, the battles you've fought alone, the times you got up after being told you wouldn't. That value wasn't granted by a title, a salary, a relationship, or a social media follower count. It was there when you were born, and it will remain when all external things have faded. It is not tied to performance. It is not conditional on success. It is not revoked by failure. It simply is. And because it is, you do not need to defend it. That is the next part. I do not defend it. Think of the men I studied: Ford, Carnegie, Edison. None of them spent their energy arguing with skeptics. They didn't write letters to critics. They didn't interrupt meetings to prove their intelligence. They didn't stay up nights crafting responses to those who doubted them. Why? Because defense is the language of the insecure, and they had already settled the question of their worth in their own minds. To defend is to admit that the accusation has weight, that the verdict is still out, that you are on trial. But you are not on trial. You are on mission. And when you stop defending, something shifts in the energy you carry. You become untouchable, not because you're invulnerable, but because you refuse to engage in battles that were never yours to fight. Then comes the final part. I express it. This is where power becomes visible. You do not prove your worth, you live it. You express it through your work, through your discipline, through the way you carry yourself when no one is watching, through the standards you refuse to lower, through the goals you pursue without apology. Expression is not loud. It is consistent, it is quiet, it is relentless. It is the man who shows up early, stays late, delivers without fanfare. It is the woman who speaks less but says more, who doesn't need to dominate a room to command it. This sentence, when repeated in the stillness before reaction, does more than calm your nerves. It reorients your entire identity. It moves you from a posture of protection to one of presence. You are no longer reacting to the world, you are responding from a place of centered certainty, and that changes everything. You don't say it to silence your feelings. You say it to honor your truth. You don't say it to appear strong. You say it to remember that you already are. Repeat it now, not in your mind, but in your voice, even if only a whisper. My value was decided long before this moment. I do not defend it. I express it. Feel the shift. That's not motivation. That's recognition. And every time you return to this sentence, especially in the face of provocation, you are not just changing your response, you are reshaping your character, building a self so solid, so certain, that disrespect doesn't diminish you, it merely highlights the gap between their perception and your reality. That gap will close, not because you convince them, but because your life, lived at that level of integrity and purpose, becomes undeniable. And when that happens, no one will need to respect you. They simply won't be able to ignore you. Power isn't taken, it's assumed, quietly, consistently, without fanfare or demand. Like the sun rising each morning, not because it has convinced the world it should, but because its nature is to shine. I've watched men who began with nothing, no connections, no advantages, no early victories, rise to positions where entire industries bent in their direction, not because they fought for recognition, but because they carried themselves as if it were already theirs. That is the essence of true power, not the desperate grasp for control, but the calm assumption of it. And the most dangerous illusion most people live under is that power must be granted, that respect is something you earn through effort, through proving, through enduring humiliation, until someone finally says, "All right, you've done enough." But that is not power. That is permission. And permission can be revoked. What I'm speaking of cannot. The men I knew who changed the world didn't wait for approval. They didn't plead for seats at tables. They built their own tables, often in silence, while others were still arguing about who deserved to sit. Carnegie didn't convince the steel barons he belonged. He outthought them, outworked them, and eventually, without a single act of confrontation, they came to him. Edison didn't defend his ideas in courtrooms or lecture halls. He locked himself in his lab and let the invention speak. Ford didn't beg investors to believe in the automobile. He built it, priced it, and put it in the hands of millions until disbelief became irrelevance. None of them reacted to disrespect with anger or desperation. They reacted with creation. And that is the highest form of response, not words, but work. Not defense, but demonstration. Because when you assume your power, you stop measuring your progress by the reactions of others and start measuring it by the integrity of your action. You begin to understand that the people who challenge you, mock you, dismiss you, they are not judges, they are mirrors. They reflect not your failure, but their own limitations. Their disrespect is often born of fear that you might succeed where they did not, fear that your path invalidates their excuses, fear that if you can rise, then their stagnation is not circumstance, but choice. And so they test you, not to see if you're worthy, but to see if you'll flinch, if you'll shrink, if you'll beg, if you'll prove them right. And every time you react, angrily, defensively, emotionally, you confirm their belief not about you, but about the world. That power is fragile, that confidence is arrogance, that success must be negotiated rather than claimed. But when you don't react, when you pause, speak the sentence, and then move forward without hesitation, something shifts. They don't suddenly apologize, they don't praise you, but their energy changes. They become cautious, uncertain, because they can't manipulate someone who doesn't care what they think. And that is when you know you've crossed the threshold, when the opinions of small-minded people no longer register as threats, but as background noise. This is not about becoming cold or indifferent to people. It is about becoming immune to their ability to derail you. It is about developing what I call inner sovereignty, the unshakable conviction that your path, your purpose, your worth is not subject to vote. You don't need their respect to proceed. You don't need their approval to begin. You don't need their belief to continue. And that is the most liberating realization a person can have, that your authority comes from within, not from without. It is not awarded. It is not earned in increments. It is not revoked by failure or criticism. It is inherent. And when you live from that truth, you stop seeking validation and start generating momentum. Your energy is no longer spent on defense, on explanation, on justifying your existence. You redirect it all into creation, into action, into the quiet, relentless pursuit of what matters. That is when people begin to respect you, not because you demanded it, but because they can no longer ignore the evidence of your presence. Respect is not given to those who ask for it. It is accorded to those who embody it so completely that silence speaks louder than words. So let this be your new psychology, not that you must earn power, but that you already possess it. Not that you must prove your value, but that you must express it. Not that you must win arguments, but that you must win time, time to build, to grow, to become so undeniably real in your purpose that the opinions of those who doubted you fade into irrelevance. That is the psychology of power, and it begins the moment you stop reacting and start assuming. For the next 24 hours, you will not defend your value ever. Not once. Not even when it feels justified. Not even when the provocation seems unbearable. Not even when silence might be misinterpreted as weakness or agreement. This is not a passive exercise in restraint. It is an active declaration of sovereignty, a deliberate withdrawal of your energy from every battlefield where your worth has no business being contested. From this moment forward, If anyone says or does anything that feels like disrespect, whether it's a dismissive comment at work, a sarcastic remark from a family member, a cold shoulder from a partner, or even an internal voice whispering that you're not doing enough, you will not argue, you will not over-explain, you will not retaliate, and you will not shrink. Instead, you will pause, just for a breath, just long enough to create space between stimulus and response, and in that stillness, you will say the sentence internally, with full presence, "My value was decided long before this moment. I do not defend it, I express it." Let it land, feel it. Let it recalibrate your nervous system, not with force, but with quiet authority. Then, and only then, will you choose your next action calmly, clearly, or not at all, because the most powerful response is often no response at all, just the unshakable continuity of your purpose. This is not about suppressing emotion or pretending you're unaffected. It's about refusing to let emotion hijack your identity. It's about training yourself to respond not from the wound, but from the whole. Now, let me show you how this works in real life, because I know you're not looking for theory, you're looking for application. Imagine you're in a meeting, and someone interrupts you, speaks over you, then turns to another colleague and says, "Let's hear from someone who actually knows the numbers." Old, you might have flushed, stammered, tried to reassert yourself with louder speech or sharper tone. Old, you might have withdrawn, convinced you'd been exposed. But new you hears it, feels the flicker of heat, and in that instant you retreat inward. Not in fear, but in focus. You say the sentence. You feel your spine straighten, not because you're bracing for battle, but because you've returned to your center. And then you continue, calmly, clearly, without urgency, without apology, because your contribution does not depend on their approval. Or imagine you're at dinner with family, and a relative says, "Still working on that project? I thought you'd have moved on by now." Old, you might have launched into a defense listing progress, citing goals, trying to prove it's still valid. But new you simply smiles, says nothing, or changes the subject, not out of avoidance, but out of knowing that your commitment doesn't require their understanding. Your work speaks, your consistency speaks, your presence speaks, and that is enough. Or consider the digital world. Someone attacks you online, misrepresents your words, mocks your effort. Old, you might have spent hours crafting the perfect rebuttal, trying to set the record straight. But new you doesn't engage. You see the comment, feel the sting if it comes, say the sentence, and close the screen. Then you go back to building, because you understand that the only record that matters is the one you're creating through action, not argument. This mission is not about becoming indifferent to people or relationships. It's about becoming indifferent to the need for validation within them. You can still love, still care, still engage, but from a place of strength, not insecurity. And here's the truth most people miss. When you stop defending, people don't disrespect you more. They respect you more because they sense the shift. They feel the boundary, not as a wall, but as a presence. They notice that you no longer flinch, no longer seek their approval, no longer perform for their gaze, and in time they adjust. Not because you demanded it, but because your energy has changed. You are no longer reacting to the world, you are leading from within it. So this is your assignment for the next 24 hours. Treat every moment of perceived disrespect as a trigger to return to your truth, not as a reason to lose it. Carry the sentence like a secret weapon, one you don't brandish, but wield in silence. Write it on your wrist if you must. Set a reminder on your phone. Repeat it 3 times when you wake up, so it's already embedded when the first test arrives. And at the end of the day, ask yourself, where did I feel the urge to defend? Where did I catch myself? Where did I succeed? Don't judge, just observe. Because awareness is the first act of mastery. This is not a one-day fix. It is the first day of a new discipline, one that rewires your reflexes, rebuilds your confidence, and returns you to the truth that you were never meant to beg for respect. You were meant to embody it so completely that no moment of dismissal can dim your light. And that begins now, not tomorrow, not when you're ready, now. The next time someone forgets who you are, let them. You won't. You are not learning to tolerate disrespect. You are learning to transcend it, not through denial or detachment, but through the quiet, unshakable realization that your life is no longer about proving anything to anyone. What you're building in these moments is not just resilience, not just discipline, but a new identity, a one where your sense of self is no longer hostage to the opinions, tones, or behaviors of others. This is not a surface-level tactic, it is a deep reconditioning of your inner world, a rewiring of the subconscious beliefs that have for years equated silence with weakness, calm with indifference, and confidence with arrogance. You are dismantling the old assumption that to be seen, you must fight to be seen, that to matter, you must argue for your place. And in its place, you are installing a new operating system, one where your value is not questioned, not negotiated, not defended, but lived. Every time you choose the sentence over the snapback, every time you pause instead of react, every time you continue forward without needing the last word, you are reinforcing that new code. You are teaching your nervous system that you are safe, not because the world has become kinder, but because you have become stronger in a way that cannot be measured by external standards. This is the essence of mastery, not the absence of challenge, but the presence of peace in the midst of it. You begin to notice subtle shifts, how you sleep better because you're no longer replaying conversations in your head, how your focus sharpens because your energy isn't being drained by emotional skirmishes, how your decisions become clearer because they're no longer clouded by the need to protect your image. You stop over-explaining your goals, not because you're hiding them, but because you understand that vision is not validated by agreement, it is fulfilled by action. You stop seeking reassurance, not because you don't care, but because you've stopped doubting. And people begin to respond differently, not because you've changed them, but because you've changed the energy you bring into the room. You walk in with less tension, speak with less urgency, listen with more presence, because you are no longer performing for approval. You are simply being, and in that being you command space without claiming it, influence without insisting, lead without declaring. That is the invisible power I've seen in every truly great man or woman I've studied. Not the loudest voice, but the deepest certainty. Not the one who wins every argument, but the one who no longer needs to. This shift does not happen overnight, but it begins decisively with a single choice, repeated again and again, until it becomes instinct. You start to see disrespect not as an attack, but as feedback, a signal that someone else is struggling, that their insecurity is spilling over, that their own unmet needs are driving their behavior. And instead of taking it personally, you recognize it for what it is, an opportunity to demonstrate your stability, not to prove your point. You realize that the people who once rattled you now reveal your progress, because where you once would have lost your peace, you now maintain it. Where you once would have lashed out or withdrawn, you now remain centered. That is growth, that is power, and it is being built in the quiet moments, the breath before the reply, the pause before the action, the internal declaration that no one hears but you. This is how legends are forged, not in grand speeches or dramatic confrontations, but in the daily disciplined choice to live from truth rather than reaction. You are not becoming cold, you are becoming clear, not indifferent, but discerning, not prideful, but possessed of a quiet dignity that cannot be bargained with. And as this new self takes root, you'll find that you no longer fear disrespect because you've stopped seeing it as a threat to who you are. It is merely weather. And you? You are the mountain. You were not born to beg for respect. You were born to embody it so completely that the very idea of questioning your worth becomes absurd. Think of the men I walked beside. Carnegie, not because he shouted his value, but because he built an empire, while others debated his right to try. Edison, not because he convinced the world he was brilliant, but because he stayed in the lab long after everyone else had given up. Ford, not because he won arguments, but because he changed the way humanity moved. None of them rose because they defended themselves against every slight. They rose because they had something greater to focus on. A mission, a vision, a purpose so consuming that the noise of doubters, dismissals, and disrespect simply could not reach the depth where their certainty lived. And that is the standard I'm holding you to now. Not perfection, not immunity to feeling, not some cold, emotionless detachment, but the quiet, unshakable alignment between who you are and how you move through the world. Because respect is not something you extract from others through force, charm, or argument. It is something you radiate through consistency, through discipline, through the unrelenting choice to act as if your value is already settled. And when you do that, when you stop reacting, stop justifying, stop shrinking or striking back, you begin to occupy space differently. You walk into rooms not with the need to be seen, but with the calm of someone who knows they belong. You speak not to prove intelligence, but to contribute. You listen not to find weakness in others, but to understand. And when someone forgets who you are, you don't correct them with words, you remind them with presence. That is the highest form of power, not dominance, but dignity. Not control, but composure. Not loudness, but lastingness. So I'm not asking you to change overnight. I'm asking you to choose, in the next moment of provocation, to pause, to breathe, to say the sentence, not as a trick, but as a return to truth. My value was decided long before this moment. I do not defend it. I express it. Let it be your anchor. Let it be your compass. Let it be the quiet rebellion against every lie you've ever believed about needing permission to be who you are, because you don't. You never did. The world will test you again and again, not to break you, but to reveal whether you've truly claimed yourself. And each time you pass the test, not by winning, but by refusing to play the game you were never meant to fight, you become more of who you were born to be. So stand, not in defiance, not in pride, but in knowing. Stand in the truth that you are not here to impress, to please, to prove. You are here to fulfill. And no momentary dismissal, no careless word, no act of disrespect can slow that fulfillment unless you allow it to. You are not waiting for recognition, you are living beyond it. That is your birthright. That is your power, and it begins right now, each time you choose not to react, but to return. Key takeaway and action step. This is not about becoming impervious to the world. It's about becoming aligned with yourself in such a deep and unwavering way that the noise of disrespect no longer disrupts your inner signal. You've heard the truth. You've felt the shift. And now it's time to act. Not someday, not when you're ready, but immediately. Because mastery is not built in moments of inspiration, but in the disciplined repetition of small, powerful choices. Your assignment is simple, but it is not easy for the next 24 hours. You will not defend your value. Not once, not to anyone, not even in your own mind. Every time you feel the sting of dismissal, the weight of a condescending tone, or the subtle pressure to justify your goals, your time, your decisions, you will pause just long enough to create space, and you will say internally, with full awareness, my value was decided long before this moment. I do not defend it. I express it. You will not say it to silence your feelings, but to reaffirm your truth. You will not say it to appear strong, but to remember that you already are. And then, from that place of centered certainty, you will choose your response, or no response at all, based not on emotion, but on purpose. This is not passive. It is strategic. It is the quiet discipline of someone who understands that real power does not announce itself, it accumulates in silence, in consistency, in the unbroken continuity of action. If you're interrupted, you don't argue. You continue, calmly, as if nothing happened. If someone mocks your goal, you don't explain. You simply keep building. If you're ignored, you don't chase attention, you deepen your focus. And at the end of the day, you will reflect. Where did I feel the urge to defend? Where did I succeed? Where did I catch myself reverting to old patterns? Do not judge, simply observe, because awareness is the first act of transformation. To make this real, write the sentence down on your mirror, in your phone, on your wrist. Say it 3 times when you wake up. Let it become your reflex, your default, your internal law. This is not a one-day fix. It is the first day of a new relationship with yourself, one where your worth is not negotiated, not proven, not doubted, but lived. And as you repeat this practice day after day, you will notice a quiet shift. The heat of offense will fade, your energy will conserve, your confidence will grow not from victory, but from presence. People will begin to treat you differently, not because you demanded it, but because you stopped needing it. And that is when you'll know you are no longer reacting to the world, you are leading from within it. This is your homework, this is your path, this is your power. Now go live it.
Remember, your success begins the moment you decide to act.